The first Lamborghini rolled into the narrow street like a low thunder, its engine echoing off cracked brick walls, and the poor old woman froze with a half-cooked flatbread in her trembling hands, unaware that the moment she had survived her whole life for had finally arrived, dressed in black metal, roaring power, and a past she thought the world had forgotten. If you believe in kindness, second chances, and quiet sacrifices that change lives, please take a moment to like this video, comment, share it with someone who needs hope today, and subscribe to the channel Acts That Matter, because stories like this remind us that goodness never truly disappears. Her name was Mara, and most people on that street never bothered to learn it. To them, she was just the old woman with the tiny food cart squeezed between a shuttered store and a graffiti-stained wall, a woman whose clothes looked older than the buildings around her, whose hands were always burned, whose eyes carried a tired gentleness shaped by decades of loss. Every morning before sunrise, Mara pushed her squeaky cart into place, lit the small gas stove, and mixed dough with hands that had buried a husband, raised children she later lost to illness and distance, and endured a life that never once offered her mercy. She sold cheap flatbreads and watery soup not to make a living, but simply to survive another day without begging. Hunger was her oldest enemy, and dignity was the last thing she still owned. Years earlier, on a winter evening when the city felt colder than usual, Mara noticed 3 boys sitting on the curb across from her cart. They were not boys by age alone but by the way they huddled together, sharing a single torn jacket, their faces sharp with hunger and fear. They looked alike in a way that made it impossible to miss the truth. They were triplets, abandoned by fate if not by blood. People passed them without slowing down. Some stared with suspicion, others with annoyance. Mara watched them until her chest began to ache, because she recognized that look too well. It was the same look she had worn when the world had taken everything from her and left her standing anyway. She had barely enough ingredients for herself that night. The coins in her pocket could not stretch much further. But when one of the boys glanced at her cart and quickly looked away, ashamed of his hunger, something inside Mara broke open. She cooked 3 extra flatbreads, ladled soup into chipped bowls, and placed the food quietly in front of them without asking for anything in return. She did not ask their names. She did not ask where they came from. She only watched as they ate as if their lives depended on it, because in some ways, they did. That night became a pattern. The boys returned again and again, always polite, always grateful, never demanding. Mara never spoke much, but she made sure they were fed. Sometimes she slipped them leftover bread wrapped in cloth. Sometimes she gave them water when they were too proud to ask. On nights when the rain came down hard, she let them huddle near her cart, pretending not to notice that they stayed long after closing time. She never told anyone what she was doing, because kindness, to her, was not something to be announced. It was simply something you did when your heart refused to look away. Then, one morning, they were gone. No warning, no goodbye, no sign of where they had gone or whether they were safe. Mara felt the familiar weight of loss settle into her bones again. She worried about them for weeks, then months, imagining the worst, praying quietly as she cooked for strangers who never knew how close she came to giving up. Eventually, survival demanded her attention again, and the memory of the 3 hungry faces faded into the quiet archive of her pain. The years passed, and Mara grew smaller as the world around her grew louder. Her cart became older, her profits thinner, her strength more fragile. New buildings rose while her life stayed the same. Some days she sold nothing. Some days she went to sleep with her stomach half empty. Yet she still gave food to those who needed it most, because the little she had was all she could offer, and offering it was what kept her human. On the morning everything changed, Mara was struggling more than usual. Her stove flickered, her hands shook, and her mind felt heavy with worry. She had overheard rumors that the city planned to remove street vendors like her, calling them illegal, unnecessary, unwanted. That day, she feared, might be her last. As she flipped a flatbread, the sound reached her first, a deep mechanical growl that did not belong on her broken street. Heads turned. People stopped walking. Then the first Lamborghini appeared, sleek and impossible, gliding toward her cart like a vision from another world. Before Mara could understand what she was seeing, a second Lamborghini followed, then a third, all black, all identical, all impossibly out of place. They parked in perfect alignment in front of her tiny shop, their polished surfaces reflecting the cracks and stains of the street as if to emphasize the contrast between 2 lives colliding. A crowd began to gather. Phones came out. Whispers spread. Mara felt her heart race with fear, not wonder. She thought something terrible was about to happen, that she was in trouble, that this was the end. 3 men stepped out of the cars, dressed in tailored black suits, their posture confident, their faces familiar in a way that made her breath catch painfully in her chest. They were older now, taller, stronger, but the resemblance was unmistakable. Time had sharpened their features, but it had not erased the bond written into their faces. The boys she had fed, the boys she had worried over, were standing in front of her, transformed by years she had never seen. Mara dropped the spatula. Her knees weakened. Her mind raced through memories she thought she had imagined. She did not know why they were there or what they wanted. She only felt the overwhelming confusion of a woman who had given kindness freely and never expected it to return. The men approached slowly, not with arrogance, but with reverence, as if walking toward something sacred. The street seemed to hold its breath. They looked at her cart, at her burned hands, at her tired eyes, and something profound passed between them, a recognition deeper than words. Years ago, they had been starving, homeless, invisible. That food had not just filled their stomachs, it had given them hope at a time when the world had told them they were nothing. They had survived foster homes, cold nights, rejection, and struggle, clinging to each other into the memory of the old woman who fed them without judgment. That memory became their anchor, their reminder that kindness existed, that they mattered, that survival was not meaningless. They had built their lives from nothing, starting with odd jobs, then small businesses, then risks that paid off because they refused to let go of each other or their values. Every success carried her face with it, the silent promise that if they ever found her again, they would honor what she had done. And now, after years of searching, they finally had. The street watched as the men transformed Mara's world in a single morning. They did not hand her cash for spectacle. They did not speak loudly or seek attention. They quietly arranged for her cart to be replaced with a permanent shop, small but clean, safe, and hers. They covered her debts, secured her future, and ensured she would never worry about food, shelter, or medical care again. They made it clear that this was not charity, but repayment of a debt that could never truly be measured. Mara felt overwhelmed by gratitude, but also by disbelief. She had never seen wealth up close. She had never imagined being remembered, let alone rewarded. What moved her most was not the Lamborghinis or the money, but the realization that her smallest act, done on her worst days, had become the foundation of 3 lives that now stood strong and unbroken. The story spread quickly. People who had ignored her for years now greeted her with respect. Her tiny shop became a place of warmth, not just for food but for hope. And yet, despite everything, Mara did not change. She still fed those who could not pay. She still listened more than she spoke. She still believed that kindness was not a transaction, but a responsibility. As the sun set that evening, the street looked the same, but everything was different. The Lamborghinis eventually left, but what they left behind was something far greater than spectacle. They left proof that compassion survives, that generosity echoes, and that no act of kindness is ever truly lost, even when it disappears into the silence of years. If this story has touched your heart, if it reminded you of someone you once helped or someone who once helped you, please take a moment now to like this video, share it with others, and support stories that keep humanity alive. Before the ending, we ask you one special thing. Please comment below and tell us whether you believe kindness always finds its way back, because your words may inspire someone who is losing hope today. Mara closed her shop that night with a heart fuller than it had ever been, knowing that even in a world that had taken everything from her, she had given something that could never be taken back, and in doing so, she had quietly changed the future. The night after the Lamborghinis left, Mara did not sleep. The small room behind her shop felt unfamiliar, as if the walls themselves were still adjusting to the miracle that had brushed past them. Every sound made her flinch, every shadow seemed too sharp, because for a woman who had lived her entire life bracing for loss, peace felt almost dangerous. She sat on the edge of her narrow bed, her hands resting on her knees, staring at the floor where years of wear had dulled the wood. Her mind replayed everything again and again, afraid that if she stopped thinking about it, the memory would vanish like a dream at dawn. For decades, Mara had trained herself not to expect anything from the world. Expectation, she had learned, was a luxury that only led to disappointment. She had expected her husband to come home from work one evening, and he never did. She had expected her children to stay close, and life pulled them away, one by one, until only silence remained. She had expected fairness, kindness, and reward, and the world had taught her instead about endurance. That was why the return of the triplets unsettled her so deeply. It challenged everything she believed about how life worked. It suggested that maybe, just maybe, the universe had been watching all along. As the early morning light crept through the cracked window, Mara rose and prepared for the day out of habit rather than need. She washed her face slowly, studying the deep lines etched into her skin, each one earned through hunger, grief, and stubborn survival. She looked older than her years, but there was something new in her eyes now, something fragile and bright. Outside, the street was already waking up. Vendors shouted, buses groaned, and footsteps echoed against concrete. Yet there was a difference in how people looked at her shop. Curious glances lingered longer. Whispers followed her movements. The woman who had once been invisible had become a story. Throughout the day, strangers stopped by not just to buy food, but to look at her, as if she were a symbol rather than a person. Some praised her kindness. Some asked questions she didn't know how to answer. Others came with skepticism, searching for proof that the story was real. Mara responded the only way she knew how, by cooking, by serving, by keeping her head down and her heart open. She did not explain herself, because the truth was simple and needed no decoration. She had fed hungry children because they were hungry. Everything else had grown from that seed. As the hours passed, memories she had long buried began to surface. She remembered the way the boys' hands shook the first time they ate, the way they never wasted a crumb, the way they always waited for a nod before sitting down, as if afraid permission could be taken away. She remembered the nights she worried they would not come back, and the relief she felt when they did. She had never known their names, but she had known their fear, and that had been enough. Love, she realized now, did not require ownership or recognition. Sometimes it existed only in the act itself. What Mara did not see was how deeply those same memories had lived inside the three men who returned to her life. For them, her cart had been more than a place to eat. It had been a lighthouse in a city that offered no shelter. In the years that followed their disappearance, they had been separated, reunited, tested, and nearly broken. They slept in shelters, under bridges, in overcrowded homes that never felt safe. They learned early that the world was quick to discard those who fell behind. But whenever one of them felt ready to give up, the memory of a tired old woman feeding them without asking anything in return pulled them back from the edge. That memory became a promise. They promised each other that if they ever escaped the gravity of poverty, they would live differently. They would build, not consume. They would protect, not exploit. They would remember where they came from, no matter how far they climbed. Their success did not come easily or quickly. It was carved out of sleepless nights, failed ventures, betrayal, and relentless effort. Each setback hardened them, but it never erased the softness at their core, because that softness had once saved their lives. Back on the street, as days turned into weeks, Mara's shop slowly transformed. New equipment arrived quietly. Repairs were made without fanfare. A small sign appeared above the door, freshly painted but modest, as if it, too, understood that excess would not suit her. The shop became a gathering place for people who had nowhere else to go. Some came for food, some for warmth, some simply to sit and feel seen. Mara welcomed them all, because her life had taught her that suffering shrinks when it is shared. Yet even as comfort entered her world, fear lingered in the corners of her mind. She worried that the attention would fade and take the support with it. She worried that she would wake up one morning and everything would be gone. Trauma does not disappear just because circumstances change. It whispers doubts, reminding you how quickly things can be taken away. On her hardest days, Mara still caught herself counting coins, rationing food, bracing for disaster. Healing, she learned, was slower than survival. One afternoon, as the city buzzed around her, Mara paused and watched a young mother feed her child at one of the small tables outside the shop. The child laughed, crumbs on his cheeks, unaware of how fragile security could be. Something inside Mara softened, and for the first time in years, tears welled in her eyes not from pain, but from relief.